Hi, I'm the Brewmaster. Welcome to the Blind Eternities Tavern. Today, I want to talk about ramp. Most of the time when I hear people talk about ramp, they focus on how much ramp, or what colors of ramp, but I think there's something more important. Today, I want to talk about the cadence of ramp. Where in your mana curve should that ramp fall to get to your win conditions and give you a smooth path to victory? If you want to hear more, pull up a chair. Have a seat at the table, and whether you're a button mash hack and slash controller bash, or a meeple moving mastermind of maps, mats, and minis, if you ruffle at the awful riffle shuffle scuffle, or if you're a click clack, pick attack, number ball luck sack, we're all here for the same reason. I'm Jake, let's talk games. So today I want to look at two specific decks that have similar amounts of ramp, but approach it very differently. And a lot of that's driven by what the deck is trying to do as a win condition. Before we get into that discussion, however, I want to showcase my deck that has the most ramp out of any deck I've ever played, and probably any deck that I would ever build. And that is my CEDH deck, built around the Gitrog monster. For those who don't know, the Gitrog monster is a commander that cares about lands dying. So you need a lot of land in play and in your hand, and the game ends usually with a combo of discarding deck, more salvage, and using its dredge effect to essentially draw your entire deck. It can make infinite mana, it can deal infinite damage, and it can do all of this at instant speed, so it's protected from a lot of responses. The way the deck works, though, requires that the commander be in play. So getting to 5 mana as soon as possible is critical. So in this deck, I'm running 40 lands. More basics than I probably should, but a whole lot of non-basics that do a variety of different things, most of them producing some sort of effect that allows them to sacrifice themselves or make extra mana. In addition to that, I'm actually running 23 pieces of ramp in the deck. Almost a full quarter of the deck is non-land ramp. And all of these cards serve us only to get to that 7, 8, 9 mana as soon as possible. Frequently, the deck wins on turn 3 or turn 4, but something you need to recognize with this much ramp is that all of these are functionally dead cards. They get the commander in play, but I'm left with not much else to choose from. So unless I can go hunt out those 1 or 2 cards that instantly win me the game, I'm dead in the water. Last night, I played a CEDH game where turn 0, before the game began, I dropped to Gemstone Caverns and had to exile a card from my hand. So I'm already -1 going into my first turn. Then, before my upkeep, I cast Vampiric Tutor to search for a card and throw that on top of the library. Now I'm -2. So I'm starting my turn with only 4 cards in hand. It's like I mulliganed a whole bunch. And I still need to play lands for turn, and I still need to play tutors and do other things to find the cards that are useful. Ultimately, I ended up winning on turn 4. I had a very good start with the right density of cards in my hand, but that's not always going to be the case. And if you commit a large portion of your deck to mana ramping, you might end up with a lot of mana and nowhere to put it. So that's what brings me to the discussion today. How do we sequence our mana ramp best for the deck that we're building? The two commanders that we're going to be talking about today are Kadena, Slinking Sorcerer, the Morph Commander, and Varus, Silvery Moon Ranger, the Elf Dungeon Commander. I want to walk through the two types of ramp that we have in these decks, the two basic ramp packages, and I want to compare them to each other and identify why we want them structured that way for these particular decks. Let's go ahead and start with Kadena, and we can walk through the ramp that we're running. Both of these decks, I believe, are tuned a little bit above average. I think I would put them at a solid 8. But you could make an argument for them being slightly higher than that based on what I'm up against and what the table is built to handle. The value that both of these decks generates gets out of hand pretty quickly. So in the Kadena deck, right now I am running about 12 pieces of ramp in the deck. Out of those 12 pieces, 2 of them cost 1 mana. Soul Ring, because we're going to be casting a bunch of face-down creatures that cost colorless, and a Birds of Paradise, because this is still a 3-color deck, and it's very important to hit whatever color we're missing when we can. The majority of the rest of our ramp is 2 mana. And then we get to the end and we have a couple that are higher mana cost, just to close us off and get us into the late game. The 3 Dynamo's critical as it taps for 3 mana, which is perfect to cast a face-down creature in addition to the one that's free on each of our turns. But that means, for the most part, we will not have a turn 1 play. And there's a reason for that. It's because we don't need one. This deck can run a far higher density of lands that enter play tapped. This means that you are enjoying the benefits of Surveil lands and Scry lands, allowing you to carefully sift the top of your deck, playing ramp on turn 2 to get that little mana boost, and then getting our commander on turn 3. At present, there's no reliable way to get this commander on turn 2 without some very expensive mana ramp. And if you look at the CEDH lists, they run it all, because it's critical that you can get your commander in play. But if your deck isn't that powerful, you are spinning your wheels, exhausting a large portion of your hand just to get your commander out a turn earlier and run out of gas in your hand that much quicker. But let's move on to the Varus deck and look at the way that we've built our mana ramp here. Now, Varus costs 3 mana and is an elf. That opens us up to a variety of different strategies that go a little bit beyond what we do with Cadena. Again, we are running about 10 mana sources in our deck, 10 pieces of ramp, but out of those 10, the first 5 are elves. 1 mana cost elves. We have a couple 2 mana costs, a couple 3 mana costs, and then finally a Caged Sun, if you want to call that mana ramp, for the extremely late game. But our mana ramp in Varus is centered around one idea and one idea only. Get Varus on turn 2. As many elves as we can run that cost 1 mana and tap for 1 mana are going in the deck. Because if we can hit Varus on turn 2, we start exploring the dungeon that much faster, we draw cards that much quicker, we're generating elf tokens and wolf tokens and goblin tokens, and we can go super wide and then hit one of our overrun effects for an instant kill. This deck is all about getting to Craterhoof Behemoth eventually. And so we have a lot of things that are high mana cost that also generate mana and allow us to search for more land. And we can build up that critical mass over time. But the most important part of our ramp package in that deck is the elves that tap for 1 mana. And so to have decks that rely on their commanders in play, it's important to think about how you get to that mana cost, what protection they need. My wife plays an Ob Nixilis Captive Kingpin deck, and it's extremely scary, and it's also a 4 mana cost commander. Getting Captive Kingpin on turn 2 is backbreaking, but it's hard to do. Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, a couple other cards will get you there, but for the most part, you're getting to your commander on turn 3 with a 4 mana cost commander. And so you don't need to run a bunch of 1 mana cost ramp. 2's usually good enough. And the benefit of 2 mana cost ramp is it tends to be a lot more flexible. So in a 3-color deck like Cadena, it plugs a lot of holes if your mana base isn't up to snuff. If you're not running full fetch lands, if you don't have shock lands and dual lands, you can fix a lot of that just by running a little bit slower ramp. The other benefit is that because you are not forcing so many cards out of your hands so fast, the threat estimation of you as a player is lower and probably more in line with the power level of your deck. Now, I can't judge that myself. You play your deck more often. You probably have a good feel for where it fits in that scale. But I'd encourage you to run ramp and run search and run finishers at the level that you want that deck to exist at. Running an extremely high-powered mana production engine into low-powered cards is probably going to get you knocked off the table in pretty short order. And because you don't have those finishers to end the game, you don't have a way to get back into it afterwards. I want to close with a quick anecdote that takes a step away from Commander, as I know that's been largely the focus of this video. And I want to walk back to 2007-2008, when I was playing Standard, running green Stompy. Mono green. See, Lorwyn had just been released, and if you were playing at that time, you know that fairies and merfolk took over. They were everywhere. And having an answer to this incremental advantage with the control cards that blue offered was really critical to surviving in the metagame. And at least in my local area, everybody responded by running either fairy or merfolk. There were a couple people still playing burn. You'll find that Pyroclasm and the like do really well in that sort of metagame. But I took a different approach, and I played mono green. See, at the time, you could run Birds of Paradise, and I believe you could run Llanowar Elves as well. So you had 8 options in your 60-card deck for a first turn mana generator. Then turn 2, you had up to 3 mana, which allows you to play out a Troll Ascetic, if relevant. Once it's in play, most of those decks can't deal with it. Terror can't target it, and your burn spells can just be regenerated away from. So it was a very good card at the time. But if you didn't have a Troll Ascetic, or you weren't playing a deck that was threatening those types of wins, i.e. Merfolk, it was better to play down bigger threats, and the best way to do that was to drop a Wall of Roots, or a Devoted Druid, or a second Llanowar Elf for Birds of Paradise, and push to turn 3. Because on turn 3, we now have 5 mana, and we could play out Spectral Force, which was an 8/8 Trampler. And against a deck that's generating incremental value over time with small creatures, an 8/8 Trampler spells Doom in short order. So the entire deck centered on playing out a couple of large creatures and instantly winning the game. That 8/8 Trampler had a rider on it that prevented it from untapping unless your opponent controlled a black permanent. But we were also running Scrib Ranger, which could return a force to our hand to untap target creature. You'll note that this also works with any of our creatures that tap for mana, so we could use that in conjunction with our Elves and Birds of Paradise to untap and produce that 5 mana that we needed to get our Spectral Force into play. So if we're consistently hitting an 8/8 Trample on turn 3, on turn 4, we're swinging for that 8, and if they try to kill it, Stonewood Invocation buffs it huge, and we usually win by turn 5, clearing out a lot of our opponent's board in the process. It was a super fun deck to play, and I think it taught me a lesson on how much mana ramp to jam in a deck when your entire goal is to move under control decks. Just get to your big finishers as soon as possible. A lot of that strategy comes into the way that I built the CEDH deck, but I realize that that opened me up to a substantial vulnerability. Relying so much on having lots of mana early on meant that if there was anything that removed those early mana-making creatures, my game was over. If you're playing a 4 mana cost commander, and you know that you don't have the high-end stuff to get it on turn 2, playing out Birds of Paradise and Llanowar Elves on turn 1 might be a liability. It's something to consider, but board wipes are pretty prevalent in EDH. And I've gotten stuck multiple times losing creatures that I never planned on attacking with, just because they were there. So try to rethink the way that you build your mana ramp into your decks. Which cards you include, how many cards you include, and when those cards come down. So I encourage you to try shifting your mana ramp. Find other areas in your curve where you need to smooth out the cards that you play, and put your ramp there. Use it to plug gaps to accelerate into those win conditions and get you that much closer to having a good play on every turn, without losing cards in your hand and without creating additional liabilities on the battlefield. It's a lot of fun, and I think it makes us better deck builders. It's been really nice talking to you.